record. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending the UXPA webinar with Ryan here, entitled "It's Time We Claim Our Collective Agency." Just a couple of slides to go through. Upcoming conferences: UXPA International, as you can see on the screen, and the UXDX USA 2023. Our next month's presentation, A Beginner's Guide to Contextual Inquiry with Manny Ikomi and from IBM. So a reminder of that. If anyone is hiring, you can raise your hand and I will allow you to talk and we can share your job with the group. So I'll give you a minute or so to see if any hands raised. Okay. Anyone looking for a job here today? Again, raise your hand. I see 2 attendees. Okay, Nakia, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about you.
What would you like to know?
Well, if you're looking for a job, let us know what you're looking for.
Sure. I'm a recent graduate who is looking for a job in UX research and UX design. I haven't been having the best of luck. And from what I have been told, companies are not taking on juniors and they kind of want you to have experience when you hit the ground running. So I've been volunteering to try to use that as experience so I can get my foot in the door.
Okay, are you a career changer or are you just new to the field?
I'm new to the field. I'm a student.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I know it's tough to get started. So if we have anybody, there is we have a Slack channel, so you can usually introduce yourself if you have not already. And usually there are more people around there that might be able to help you out with either mentoring or even post a job that you might qualify for.
And you are, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
I'm Craig Collier. I'm a board member. I'm in charge of my job here. I'm filling in for the monthly call lead, but I'm the lead of the annual conference, yearly conference. That is my job with the board.
Thank you, Craig. I spoke with Richard and I'm going to be volunteering for one of your workshops that you guys are doing with Northeastern.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Anybody, I think somebody else raised their hand. No. Okay. Ryan, here's your title slide. Would you like to introduce yourself to the team, and then I'll turn it over to you?
I actually have my own slides that I'll take a less wordy version of this and introduce everybody to me. Right. It's filled with GIFs and things like that. So I'm happy to take over if
all right.
You're good.
Stopping sharing.
All right. So here we go. Is everybody able to see my slides?
Indeed.
Got them? Okay. I'm just pulling up the little windows so that I can see anything happen. Okay. So hi, everybody. Rad to be here. I am actually not in Boston. I'm up in Vermont, but close enough, right? It's New England. So we're going to talk about today. It's time that we claim our collective agency. I am going to let you know up front that for the next 30-ish minutes, I'm going to be talking about stuff you should know to talk about design differently. And you are likely to have some feelings. I know we have a mixed audience here. I'm going to do my best to kind of be able to share my experiences and still talk about the different stages of career that we're in. So when I mention mixed, I just imagine we have people who are new to the field, like Nikia trying to get first gig, and people who've been in the field for a while. And so while I go through this, you might have some feelings, and feelings are okay. What I share is largely based on my experiences, and they might not be the same experiences you have had. Okay, so let's get into it. Before we actually start, I would like you to imagine a year from now. You are feeling valued and heard as a leader. You are seeing the results that you have hoped for, and you and your teams are exceeding all expectations. I would love for you to jump in the chat and tell me what's different about you a year from now compared to how you are today. Hopefully we get some volunteers. Everything is going well, and you are feeling seen and heard. In the chat window, tell me. Oh, you've got a seat at the executive table. Interesting. Cool. Thanks, Don. We're going to talk about that. Anyone else? People understand the full breadth of what I do as a designer, not just creating screens. Increased confidence. No more imposter syndrome. Rad. That's a good one. Any others? Okay. A full pipeline of great consulting work. Yay. We all want that. Particularly right now, right? Okay. Keep filling them in there. I'll pay attention and keep looking at them, but let's move forward. So who is this person in front of you? Who is Ryan? You should know that everything begins and ends with these 4 other people in my life. My world is really around our family, and that's where everything begins and ends. I have lived in a variety of places. I was born and spent some early years in Arizona. I then spent my formative years in New Jersey, went back to Arizona for school, moved to LA for a while. Who would ever do that? I did. Moved to Austin for a job, then moved to Switzerland, retreated back to Austin, and now we live in Vermont. We've lived in Vermont for about 2 years now and are loving it. I've had a lot of work, a lot of gigs before ever kind of getting into software and technology and designing and making products. And I worked on a farm. I was a ski instructor, worked in a call center and bartended in college. During the 90s, I was part of the rave scene and being an event coordinator, how very 90s. And I moved to LA because I was a professional actor for a few years while I was working and making websites at night. So I've had a few different things going on. And I am very passionate about music. Music is everything. It's how I experience the world. And I love to travel. I do love to ski. I love Liverpool Football Club, and I love to dance. Dancing just should be everything, right? I have had a lovely career where the best part has been being with other people that I have learned from and learned with, had great experiences, done great work, all those types of things. This has been the highlight of my career. And I've had a longish career, as maybe some of you have, and spent those first formative years kind of on my own, freelancing, then started getting into big company work and spent a lot of time there. And really what this talk is about and where it's coming from is really through my experiences of being a lead at Apple for about 4 years. Started right before, 2 weeks before the iPhone came out, and that was a pretty incredible experience. I then, 3 separate times, was hired to build design organizations from scratch in very interesting organizations that where you wouldn't typically see a designer at that time. I then left design, and I worked in corporate strategy for USAA, the bank and insurance company. And I wrote a book a couple years ago, and it's totally free. And that's why I share it here. You can go download it if you would like to learn a little bit about business thinking for designers and really helping us frame a little bit of our work in different contexts, in different languages, if you will. I run a tiny community and company called Second Wave Dive. It's pretty much all virtual, all remote. And we primarily focus on helping professional designers, mostly those who are on the management path, really begin to help prioritize and make influential arguments and gain that confidence as a leader. I do run a school as well called Chief Design Officer School. And we just started Anything But Design, a podcast and editorial platform where we're just sharing stories about designers that are anything but, because there's a lot more to us. Okay, remember, everything begins and ends with my family. Enough about me. Why am I here? I'm going to start this and just say I threw together today kind of two different talks and mixed and matched them. Hopefully they go together, but if they don't, we'll make do. But why am I here, really? Well, I'd like to start by rethinking the role of designers. As designers, your goal is pretty much to make happen what no other function can. And I think what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years around the design industry is there's often a lot of discussion on what designers can do that other people can't. But in my experiences, what I have seen and noticed is that great designers, great design leaders, great organizational leaders, they make things happen. And so here's a little provocation for you. If you would like better outcomes like sustainability or well-being or accessibility or equity, any of these things, you got to know that you have to make things happen. That's going to be that sweet spot of making things. So I'm here to talk about making things happen. But I also want to talk about influencing decisions. So for those that are still early in their career, you might not be there quite yet, but just in a couple of years, you'll start to notice that influencing how decisions get made is really the hardest problem to solve. That when we are talking about working with other cross-functional partners, other people of different disciplines, other people with different backgrounds, that trying to work together and influence how we make decisions collectively is the hardest problem to solve. And let's face it, design has kind of been all the rage for the last 10, 15 years. We told everybody there was this key element, this third leg to the stool, and they bought it. They said, yeah, we think so. And we started seeing design show up in all these other mediums, all these other different formats that weren't design related. And we started seeing lots of case studies, and we see lots of people now studying and entering the market as designers, which is pretty incredible. There are now lots of design executives. If you would have asked a lot of us 10, 15 years ago, how many chief design officers we knew, or VPs or head of design that we knew, maybe on one hand we can count them. And now there's quite a lot of attention being placed on the particular skills of design coming in and helping companies. So what we also know, and this number is probably a little bit different now considering the kind of current macroeconomic environment, but just last year, there were over 250,000 people worldwide employed as designers. That's pretty amazing. That's like going to see Queen at Wembley Stadium 3 nights in a row. Pretty rad. So that's tremendous progress. As an industry, we've made tremendous progress. Again, if you were to go back to, say, 2005, weren't too many of us. It was kind of a very niche industry. But there's a gap. And the gap is when we saw the rise in designers being employed and a lot of senior leaders coming in, when surveyed, between 2010 2020, we saw this number of companies employ senior designers double. But when surveyed and asked, those same organizational leaders, 90% of them said they didn't quite think design was reaching its full potential. It wasn't quite having the impact that they had expected. So let's talk about that. Because there might be this other provocation that I would ask. And maybe if you want to jump into the chat, I tend to like to have interactive conversations with everybody. How many of you believe this is because those same company leaders don't get design? You can raise your hand. You can just sort of do it virtually. But I want you to think about that. How many of you deep down think that this number of 90% is because they don't really get design? This is one of the narratives that we've heard over the years. Oftentimes they think design is with the little d. True. Yeah. I see a raised hand. Let's see. Is it Nikia? Okay. Craig, I'm going to let you drive so that I can, you can drive the participants.
Yeah. Did you want to let her in to chat with her?
Just if somebody raised their hand. Let's see. It doesn't help. It depends. P.S. I don't think we can comment vocally. Dawn. Yeah, I think it's a webinar, so we have to invite you and allow you to talk. I'm going to allow Nikia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, I do agree with that statement right there. I would say that not only do they not get design, but a lot of times they don't value things. A lot of art is not valued. They like it, it's pretty, but when it comes to implementing standards and ideals from the blueprints, they don't want to do it, or they have their own aesthetics that they might want to do, and they don't value your input. Or what's happened in my experience is when you conduct the research for why a design might be appealing this way, or research for any project, they don't like the results of the research, and it triggers a backfire effect, and they double down on their original biases, and they don't move from that. So it's like, oh, okay, well, what do I do now? My research shows otherwise, and you're not listening to me.
Yeah. So I think you reached an important thing. Have they really changed? I'm going to put you back on mute. Thank you for sharing that. And I see a lot of people jumping into the chat too. They might not have the mindset. They might, it depends. It doesn't help. And maybe designers don't get it either. Okay. So it's an intentional provocation. Go ahead, Craig.
I've opened the mic for everybody. So if anybody wants to unmute and jump in, we're all set in the future. Thank you.
Rad. Thank you. So when we look at this number, I think a lot of us in our industry sort of see this and they say they don't get it. And when I look at this number, I'm interested about the makeup of that 90%. Has that C-suite really changed in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years? And if we look at the C-suite itself, the people who are responding to this survey, they kind of are the same voices and profiles. I mean, there's been some tiny movement, but overall, if we look across, a lot of the same behaviors and beliefs, a lot of the same decisions and policies, a lot of the same definition of value. So while there's been this giant uplift of sort of design as an industry coming in, what we see kind of the makeup of the C-suite of that executive level is there hasn't been too much change there. So it's an interesting sort of data point to look at. And so what I would say is like, well, those factors are kind of the same as it's ever been. And I think this is going to be the part where you might have feelings. I think we can be sometimes a little naive into understanding how rooted those beliefs and policies are. And I think we are often pushing too hard in kind of unclear directions. And I think we are often using the wrong tools for the very right problems. So what do we do? What do we do? By the way, you can, if you're experiencing other things, as I mentioned at the top, you can totally think we need different things, but these are just the observations that I've had. And I think what happens is if we have these things, if we're not quite sure how rooted these policies are, and if we're pushing too hard in unclear directions, and if we're using the wrong tools, we can unintentionally prop up their existing beliefs of what good is. And we often diminish our own value and our own worth. And again, your feelings might be coming up here. So while we've made tremendous progress, a seat at the table without having agency is really a trap. So for those who are looking to get that seat at the table, to be an executive, I want to talk about agency today. What does that mean? Well, I think it means there's some things that we need to do differently, that it's on us to try some new types of stuff. And I think we need to let go of some of the things that we hold most dear to us to better show our impact. I think we need to better demonstrate, not just state, the value of what we do. And I think we maybe need to defy some industry conventions to exceed our expectations of ourselves, our expectations of our companies, our expectations of our teams. I think we need to talk about design differently to increase our impact. And when we think about the factors that go into decision-making, this is where I'm going to show this slide again. There are lots of factors that show up here. This is actually the wrong version of this. I have a better version of this in a couple slides. And I think what we need to do is to better choose how we decide or act into response to these factors that are present. And you all deserve to have the confidence to do that well. You absolutely do. All of us do. But when we think about how decisions are made in our organizations, we can often see there's a shape that sometimes decisions are made for business reasons. Sometimes it's for product reasons. Sometimes or oftentimes there's a lot of like process or practice reasons. If you're in an agile environment, there's a lot of reasons we make decisions because we do stand-ups or because we do sprints. And there are a lot of decisions that are made that are just people reasons. That's the way they want to do it. And if we take a little look back, and if I look back across my career, what I began to see is that there were patterns. That when I was at USAA, a lot of how decisions got made were related to relationships and process. Very little when it came down to core business or product fundamentals. But when I was in electronic arts, it was actually a lot of product decisions and people decisions. Not so much practice. Nestle, it was all people and business stuff, not a lot of product stuff. And Apple was kind of the most balanced that I saw. So again, I want to talk about feelings for a second, that they may come up, because these factors that affect decision-making are not just the ones that we know about of money or know-how or ambition. We're talking about that there's other decisions that are made that are due to risk tolerance or racism or sexism or fear or crisis or family of origin type stuff. We're talking about complex things that go into how people make decisions. And the one thing that I think I've noticed over my career is that many times I just wished those things weren't there. and wishing that they weren't there did not make them go away. So what do? I want to talk about agency. Agency is a decision or action taken to produce a particular desired result. And for most of us, again, when we think about this stuff, when we think about these factors, what we're trying to figure out is how do we create some type of capability to choose how we decide or act in response to these things. That having agency is our own ability to choose how to respond. There are other ways that we can define agency, certainly at the systematic level and the societal level, that are very much there. And these are bigger issues. In this case, when I'm just talking about agency, I'm talking about our own capability within these systems to have a little bit of confidence to choose how to decide or act, and to try to make things happen while honoring our own values and our worth, not to try to manipulate or coerce. Because again, a seat at the table without having this inner ability, this inner agency, is a trap. So I'm here to talk about claiming agency, and every single one of you deserves to feel confident at this. So I'm really here to talk about confidence. Here's a little personal story about choosing how to act in confidence. So in 2007, I was hired at Apple. And Apple at the time was making this type of stuff. This was before the iPhone came out. And I got to work on none of that. I actually worked in-house and did what we now call enterprise UX. And so my job there was to build tools like this before, things like Zendesk or Service Desk, these types of tools out. I worked in AppleCare and built internal tools for AppleCare support agents. So I didn't work on the fun Steve Jobs things and all that design stuff. I actually worked for Tim Cook when Tim was the chief finance officer or chief financial officer. And at that time, a lot of my work revolved around these things like customer service and workforce management and learning management, and case management, all this type of stuff. And it was a world full of metrics. It was a very different approach to making decisions that I had ever been in before as a designer. AppleCare had 13 key performance indicators and 23 supporting performance indicators. They were very much very mature around using metrics and quant analysis to balance out their qual analysis. And so while success was created with making products, a lot of times success was communicated in a very different way. Perhaps you've seen one of these, like a scorecard or some type of status with the red, yellow, and green indicating how we're doing. And this was no different at Apple. And after being there for about 2 years, I was challenged to do something seemingly simple. My boss came to me and said, hey, a lot of our other teams in different parts of the organization are quantifying the value of their work using these dashboards and scorecards and things. Can you do that? And I was like, I don't know that I can. I've never seen anybody doing something like this before. I'm not really sure. And so I definitely wasn't ready for that challenge. But my boss didn't ask me to do this as a threat, didn't hold my job over me or say that I had to do this. He asked me out of curiosity, is this something that might be possible? And because my boss asked with that curiosity, I said, challenge accepted. Yeah, I'll try it. Let's see what happens. So where did I start? Well, I started with that question. I said, I don't really want to quantify my work. I think where I want to start is I really want to qualify my work. And so I started as a researcher, and I began kind of taking a step back and observing what I was doing and the decisions that were happening around me, more like a researcher might. And when I started doing that, I said, well, you know, I'm already using some quant methodologies like system usability scales or technology acceptance models. I'm already using basic rubrics and ratings to kind of evaluate my work. But every time I shared those with my colleagues, they just melted. They just didn't care. They didn't know what I was talking about. And I'd lose them in every conversation. And so what I began to notice was I didn't really need to devise a new metric or scale. I really needed to talk about design differently. And it just happened to be pretty lucky at the time that in 2009 at the IA Summit, Austin Govella and Livia Labat created what they called the UX Health Check. And it's basically a rubric rating scale for how they thought they were doing on their design work, their UX work. And they basically set up this 1 through 5 rating to kind of self-evaluate how things were going. And at the same time, I was working with a bunch of MBAs. And so they were introducing me to structural frameworks that came from the business world, like the balanced scorecard. And I noticed there were some similarities here, that a lot of the elements of the balanced scorecard basically just put categories of health together, but they were using a mixture of quant and qual to basically give ratings of how things were going. And so my first attempt at doing this was just to kind of smash these things together to see if we can sort of measure. And I came up with my own categories of health to just sort of relate that when you, my friends, talk about business results, I'm really connecting that to usability. That when you talk about technical performance, I'm thinking about functionality. That when you're talking about adoption, I'm kind of thinking about credibility, like people want this and it's an actual credible option for them. And when you're thinking about communicating, I'm thinking about are the users aware? Are they aware of this? And so these were my initial categories of health to try to figure this out. And what I could tell you is that this exercise was a big exercise in discomfort. I had no real idea what I was doing. I didn't know if it was going to work in any way. But because I was challenged in that inviting, curious way, it allowed me to keep going, and it started to work. It started to make sense, that kind of creating these things. And when that started working, that little piece of work, I felt very valued in my work. And I had the naive belief that this could work everywhere. And I was totally wrong. Because when I went to my next job, I was hired by my boss at Apple to come bring me over to Electronic Arts and build an org from scratch. I was really excited. And I shared my progress on social media that said, after 4 great years, I'm going to move over to this new company. I'm very, very excited. And I maybe had a little bit of an ego at the time. I definitely did. And I thought, geez, if they've handpicked me, I must be exactly what they need. They're waiting for me. I took this picture on Instagram and I said, here's the path forward. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Things weren't going very well. And the only indication that you could see that things were not going very well is I did not post on Instagram for a year. And my next photo was me in the middle of the night at 12:30 a.m., unable to sleep because I was so anxious. I lost all my confidence. And I just thought, I've made the wrong decision. And what was happening around me was that as soon as I arrived at Electronic Arts, I started getting emails like this. Hey, I'm so glad you're here. And I know you don't have a computer yet, but I need you to mock up the app because I already told leadership we'd be building it. And it shouldn't look like what we did at Apple. And I thought to myself, it doesn't seem like a very mature way of making a decision or approaching design. And I got emails like this. Hey, before you got here, I already told the C-suite that this would work and it ships tomorrow. Can you just sign off that you approve? It's like, gosh, that doesn't seem like a good decision either. Oh, and Ryan, I know you were here to build and scale an organization, but we just simply forgot to add headcount to your team for the year. So you'll just have to work with whoever is already here. And so these little things started chipping away. And at that time where I went and I felt valued, suddenly I felt powerless. And I was not ready for that challenge of feeling powerless. And so I did not accept that challenge. I said, forget that. I'm going to prove them wrong. I resisted my discomfort and I just started showing up to every meeting, showing them all the tools, all the processes, all the mechanics, all the ways in which we made and did work and did good work. And that did not work. Somehow me showing how we worked was not resonating with them and they were not changing their minds. And it all came to a head in a meeting where I was with my peers and my boss in one of these annual meetings, trying to figure out planning. And my boss said, I don't like the design. It should work like how I buy a refrigerator on Amazon. And it was at that point that I kind of lost it. My eyes crossed and I just said, that does not make sense. We are not selling refrigerators on Amazon. This is not what we're doing. I just don't know what we're talking about. That conversation didn't go very well. My boss did not really appreciate that line of inquiry. And then at that point, I felt worthless. I just did not feel very good. But I was really lucky because at a place when I was really, really stuck, I had a Jeff. And Jeff was a peer that I had worked with also at Apple. You can see maybe some nepotism here that a few of us were hired from Apple to come to Electronic Arts. But Jeff was somebody that I had worked side by side with for 4 years. And Jeff was in that meeting and Jeff took me outside and took me on this path. And he said, let's go for a walk. And I'll never forget what Jeff said. Jeff said, Ryan, you're right. You are right that what we're doing is not really the right approach. But I can see you're struggling. And I think what you need to learn is to let others be right with you, to invite them to be curious and allow them to be right with you. And I think that will be helpful to you. And so it was a good pep talk. And I took that to heart and we walked back. And I felt in that moment seen and valued by Jeff that I hadn't felt in a long way. And feeling seen and valued got me to make a little bit of a change in myself. It pushed me to change how I showed back. And we actually had to go back into that meeting, that annual meeting with all the same people. And rather than kind of chiming in and giving my pretty direct thoughts, I pinched my leg under the table for the rest of that meeting just to remind myself to stay in my body and to not really talk the way I had been talking. And kind of what it allowed me to do was, again, be in that researcher mode and kind of observe what was happening. And I sent an email to my boss right after that meeting. And I said, hey, I apologize for that. But also, when you talked about buying a refrigerator on Amazon, it kind of got me to think about something in a new way. Thank you. It got me to think about this. Now, what it got me to think about, that this part was the thing that I had been thinking about. But what I recognized is that I didn't validate my colleague. Even if I disagreed with them, I did not validate that they had their own thoughts and feelings and truths about the approach. And I noticed that when I saw and validated my boss, they actually changed how they made decisions with me from that day on. And I felt a little less stuck. And I felt a little more confident as I continued to do that. And it was at that point that that confidence gave me the sense that I belonged in those conversations for the first time. And when I felt like I belonged, I began to notice new things. What did I notice? Well, I think for a long time, I expected the work to speak for itself. We do good work. Here's how we do good work. And it just doesn't. I also noticed that I was spending a lot of time explaining things over and over again. That I was in meetings and I was talking a lot. or I would make an argument and then have to spend a lot of time defending it and explaining it over and over again. And to me, I think that's just generally a red flag if we're having to talk a lot. And I also noticed that I expected the colleagues to care about the things in the way that I cared about them. And they didn't. But on the positive end, I began to notice I made things happen when I let go of having my own way. And I had more influence and impact when I worked on my own discomfort in these conversations. And that not big billion-dollar transformations, but planting tiny innocuous seeds of change was way more impactful. And all that work was much harder and took a lot longer than making a site or an application. And what I figured out is I kind of need to get strategic in my approach in working with colleagues. So the second time I was at EA, I also noticed something else, because as I had gained confidence and began to have better interactions, I was reminded that it wasn't only about me. Not only did I have a Jeff, I had a May. This is May Reed, a wonderful design leader, and May was on my team and noticed me interacting with my colleagues. And when we walked out of that meeting, May said, I can understand what you're doing. I see what you're doing, but I don't know how you've gotten there. I don't know how you made that journey. That's what I came here to learn. And it was really important because even though I had been leading teams for a while, it was really the first time I had heard this in a different way that said, oh my gosh, collective confidence is actually the key to exceeding expectations. That it's good that I exceed them, but it's really confidence at scale. That's how meaningful things happen. And so I think that's a challenge that I accept now. Should we have a dance party? No, we'll keep going. Okay. So how do you get confidence? Well, in all my years, it's going to sound very simple. There's two things you need. You do need a Jeff. You do need leadership support. And that is really, really hard to find, and you need it. But the second thing that we need is purposefully practicing new things. And as we move through our careers, it can be really hard to try new things. We've become really good at becoming perfectionists. We become really good at specific skills. But as we progress through our career into different roles, suddenly there are new things there. And we have to get back into that sort of function, that experience of being quite open to try new things. And that's, again, I think, a challenge that we need to accept. So let's purposely try some new things. This is where I'm going to go on a little segue, and I am going to go on a tiny kind of rant. Let's see how this works. You can totally disagree from now on, but I want to talk about the way that we talk about design, the way designers talk about design. Design, if you look it up in the dictionary, it is a verb, and it talks, the definitions are to prepare a sketch, to prepare a drawing, to make the drawing or sketch, to intend for a specific purpose, or to plan or fashion the form. I think we use this definition a lot. But design is also a noun. And a lot of times our colleagues are thinking about the plan or sketch. Can you give me the design? Sometimes we use it as the problem-solving methodology. It's also a stage and a process. Design with a big D is also a functional unit inside of an organization. The design team. We're going to work with design. My favorite definition, number 7, it is a plot to deceive. So design is a very confusing word. This is one of my favorite graphics created by Ellen Lupton at Cooper Hewitt when she was there. Design is, yes, it is the art. It is the communication. It's the stuff all around us. But I asked this question of why does design exist to designers? And here are some of the answers I got. It's because what humans do. It's a set of applying principles to different cases. Its design is making intentional interventions to bring what is created or intend to what is created, because you have a problem to solve. A design exists to devise courses of action because there's no other discipline. Now, I agree with all these definitions. And I agree with all these ways that design is. And I love these things that our friends make for us, really. But the way that we talk about design and use these definitions, these stories have not really changed the perceptions that our colleagues have of us, of design or designers. These stories, these definitions have not really resolved our biggest struggles and pains as professional designers. And these stories aren't necessarily challenging organizations to do better. These aren't the stories we're looking for, I don't think. And I think that because I want to talk about the way the organizations think about design. As I mentioned before, I spent some intentional time outside of the design focus working in other parts of the organization. And so while we sold them this three-legged stool, what they heard a lot were these types of principles, mostly coming from men, about the rounding sort of, industry-wide guidance of what good design is. And we saw lots of reports coming out of the business value or the Envision report around maturity or the DMI value scorecard, which was kind of doing post-analysis related to how, quote unquote, design companies were doing in the stock market. And I think what we maybe were doing as an industry, and that's not maybe us as individuals, but as an industry, we were selling design as magic. And as you know, design is not magic. But I think that's kind of the package that was sold and bought by organizations, by companies. So why are we continuing to share those stories that haven't changed that perception? Company leaders hire designers as a transactional agreement. They hire any employee as a transactional agreement. Professional design, when we get paid, it's really an exchange of labor for payment. And again, if we want to better connect these things that we are hoping to get, we have to remember that design has to connect to that transaction. And I'm going to take a little bit of a segue and just talk about business models and business strategies for a second, because I think these are words that we hear a lot too, and our business friends don't even explain what they are. But a business model is simply an outline of how a company intends to create value for the customer, deliver that value to the customer, and capture value back. Oftentimes, that's money. A business strategy, how is it slightly different? Well, a business strategy is just how the company is trying to do that different than other people, than other companies. The goal of the business model is to figure out how a company stays in business, sustains itself. The goal of the strategy is to create a competitive advantage. So remember, the business model is all about figuring out how the company is going to capture money. But the business strategy is how they're trying to be different or better, have a superior business position. And when we think about these strategy words, those can get complex too. And if you're in small organizations, this is all kind of the same. Bigger organizations, they kind of separate corporate strategy from business strategy. But I particularly want to focus on business strategy because it's quite similar to product strategy. But business strategy is just really a strategy of creating some type of vision and goal, stuff you've probably heard of. But they're key components of where a business tries to figure out which markets to play in, where to play, who are their audiences, how to win, how to create that differentiated competitive advantage, And then they create a roadmap to make those things as a reality. What do you think designers are hired to do in this model? If you were to guess, what are designers hired to do in this model? Anybody have a guess in the chat? Let's see. Visions and goals. Interesting. Roadmap. Got it. Cool. 99% of employees have been hired to help how to win. Because at the business strategy level, the roadmap is kind of already defined. That is different than the roadmap of creating a product or service. Why companies hire employees, just generally, most of us, is because they have already picked how they're trying to win and they want our help. Now, when you get into the nuance of how to win, companies will say, we need some type of product strategy. We need a marketing strategy. We'll need a sales strategy. We'll need some type of operations strategy. There's more to this, but those are the basics. You may be asking, where the hell is design? Anybody asking that? Where's design? Well, guess what? Design is a catalyst to those things. This might be kind of difficult to hear, and you might not agree with me. But design exists, as most company leaders think about it, as a way to make some of these things better. Can a product exist without designers? Yeah. Can design exist without a product? No. So design is a catalyst. Now, when companies decide what they're going to do, they have different strategies of how they're going to win. Sometimes they need different design to catalyze different parts. And what we need to know is that most of this stuff has kind of already been decided. It might not be a good strategy, but it's kind of already been decided. And I think this stuff is way more rooted than you think it is. And this stuff is very specific to the company that you're working for and with. So yes, it depends. But this is where a broad framework, say like Dieter Rams' principles, might be very inspiring for us, but they're not very actionable for us often in the company we are in, because they are not specific to what the company is trying to do and how to win. So again, design is a catalyst to better. Really, professional design exists. Why companies pay professional designers to help support or create competitive advantage. So how do we figure out why design here, like here at your place, exists? Well, the answer is in really understanding the business strategy, understanding that overall business strategy. And if we look at the basics of a business strategy and how companies figure that out, they kind of have these big basic questions of why do we exist in the world? Who's our target audience that we're trying to serve? What's the value proposition that we are providing to them? And then how do we know that we're doing that well? And there are three basic ways to win. Companies can choose to be a cost leader. Really, they're trying to be the most affordable. By the way, have you ever picked something or bought something because it was the cheapest? It was the most affordable. We all have. Is that not desirable? Totally desirable. But companies could also choose to be different or better. So you get the case of like Apple or Emirates. They are making the deliberate choice as part of their business strategy to be different or unique. Then there are some companies who choose to be a niche audience. You'll notice I have Facebook there. That was when Facebook started. Before they became this big, giant $3 billion person platform, they focused on a niche audience, university students only, at one college, at Ivy League colleges, broadening. You also have Powell's Books, which is a famous bookstore in Portland. They're not doing a big chain. They are a very niche audience. And a lot of times, especially during downtimes, companies are just trying to stay alive. So you might have a company like Peloton right now. So to figure this out, to kind of reverse engineer, how do we kind of get a sense of what's going on? We can ask questions to our business leaders, to our product leaders. Who's our audience that we're targeting? Are we focusing on a broad or niche audience? Are we focusing on being affordable or being different? How do our products or services make money? And it's through here, if you're getting vague answers, what I want you to know is that maybe you are working in a strategy, a business strategy that we would call stuck in the middle. And design can't really fix that. We can't address that. Because what we do is catalyze which audience or making something better. But to think about this path to business strategy, it really gives us a clue to figure out why design exists at the company. Because what we want to say is that design exists here. We've been hired here to address these business situations and complications that require our skills to fix it. And design exists here to focus on specific parts of the business that are critical to winning. And design exists here to provide different value compared to product managers or engineers. And design exists here to demonstrate, not just state, that we are achieving better outcomes. So some of the answers that I've used in the past is it depends, is sometimes we're here to help just a division win. Sometimes we're here to create new competitive advantage. Sometimes we're here to increase efficiencies or reduce costs. Sometimes we're here to reduce risk before going to the market. It really depends on what the business is kind of needing to help win. So after 10 years of kind of doing this, there's a couple lessons that I think have resonated. Is a lot of times we have to go just a little bit beyond what is already expected of us. And I think a lot of times our colleagues expect us to give them design stuff, or give them, our keynote presentations, but they don't necessarily expect that we might use their idea first or use their PowerPoint. And I think they always expect us to give some type of recommendation, but maybe to go a little bit step further, we might include some type of analytical pros cons analysis of our recommendation so that they understand the reasoning. And I think what's expected of us is to show those same artifacts over and over again, maybe like a journey map or a service blueprint. And maybe what's not expected of us is to acknowledge when that's not working as a communication device. And I think it's expected that we're going to debate how to do things, but maybe it's not expected that we just try their approach first. Because yes, I think a lot of us believe that things like NPS don't mean anything, but do we have demonstrable evidence at our companies that it is not working? The second thing is connecting design actions with other decisions often make things happen. So expose the areas of risk that they care about in your analysis. So we might often say, oh, this is bad for the users, which might be true. But if that is not resonating with them and they are not making a new decision, perhaps expose that it's not increasing velocity or it's not changing sales. And be clear how your hypotheses connect to their conclusions. If we increased the number of alt tags used, we think that will reduce errors. And if we reduce errors, we should reduce time on task. And if we do that, we should increase adoption, which will improve CSAT and bring us revenue. And these North Stars metrics that we talk about, they're really maps. And it's really us trying to connect these metrics and show some type of correlated relationship. I think another thing that works really well is remixing what's already valued and what's already useful. So a lot of times I see designers wanting to throw out those presentations. These are terrible font choices. But you don't maybe know that this is a love language your colleagues receive. That underneath those presentations are actually an analytical storytelling structure that helps them understand arguments, and it might help you make good arguments. It's all the pyramid principle by Barbara Minto. This has been taught for over 60 years to our business colleagues. Or coaching prompts are great ways to get curious, to ask. Remember that prompt that I gave you at the beginning? Hey, boss, you said that, NPS is critical. I wonder if we do well with NPS, what's different about us tomorrow? What's different about us a year from now? And maybe your boss or your peer will give you a little bit more explanation of what they mean when they say that. And lastly, I think it's these intentional, small, measurable actions that make things happen. They're uncomfortable, but maybe they're just within our comfort zone enough for us to try. Again, like using coaching prompts. Or instead of just thinking of the map, just thinking, can we start with one relationship? Can we just look to see maybe does an error rate relate to CSAT as a start? I'm not going to jump into Figma because I've been talking a long time. What I want to say is that you are right a lot of the time. I love working with designers because you are right a lot of the time. You have wonderful, wonderful skills and your instincts are right. It's super important that you invite others to be right with you. You have untapped power to challenge the beliefs of why design exists. You know how to empathize. You know how to analyze jobs to be done. You know how to understand behavior. Our colleagues are humans too. And you are very well positioned to affect meaningful change. But again, that requires us with the ability to let go of some of the things we hold most dear to us, perhaps get into more measuring and demonstrating, backing up our arguments, not just stating the value of what we do, to defy some industry standard, conventions, just to talk about design differently. You deserve to have that confidence to do that well. The professional design exists to support or create competitive advantage. Dance party? That's it. I know I talked for a long time. If you ever want to come email me at all, please feel free. Here's my email address. I'd be happy to chat. I'm just 2 hours away too. I should go hang out in Boston. So you got this. That's it. That's all from me. Thanks for hanging out. And I spoke way longer than I thought I would.
Quite all right. Thank you, Ryan. I'm sure on behalf of all of us here, we appreciate the time you put into merging your presentations into something wonderful that we could all enjoy. And thank you from UXPA Boston for offering up your time and helping the community.
My pleasure. Happy to hang out.
Yeah. So
any questions?
Yeah, let's open it up to questions. Anybody could raise their hand, and then we'll call on one person and then unmute them. That way we don't have multiple people calling at a time. So go ahead. Let's see.
We don't have to have questions either.
Guess not.
Any disagreements?
Lou, go ahead, Lou.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. This was awesome. And I can now see where I've tried to do some things right and also where I've done a lot of things wrong. And so this was a really big epiphany, for me that the business strategy is important to ask about, but maybe if you ask about it too much, it could backfire on you and make you seem like a real, what would you call nuisance, right?
And I think too, Lou, we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of business people who can't actually explain the business strategy. Like really,
As I found out.
Right? Yeah, really, they can't.
So yeah, it got me into trouble. And I was actually told on some of my last days, when I said, yeah, I was trying to understand the business strategy, I was told, well, that's not my job to understand the business strategy. So
I'm sorry.
yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, I don't mean to complain, but I really think this helped me understand some things that I can do better next time. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We talk about those coaching prompts, and I think one of the ways that it helps is so much of coaching is kind of inviting somebody else to have the answer, rather than being the expert. And what I noticed is that, Lou, this is just my observation, that a lot of people who don't respond well, like saying you don't need to know about the business strategy, that's not your job, it's typically a defensive reaction. It's typically because they don't know and now they feel exposed. And it can feel like a threat, that's just been my observation over the years.
I think I've found out that the need to be right, or the fear of appearing not right, is very important to pretty much the majority of people. We don't want to look like fools. And so maybe my repeated question made people realize, hey, I don't know the strategy. I don't know if it's important to me, but I don't know. I would think that if it were me, and this is naive, right? If it were me, I might say like, well, I'm not exactly sure. Let me find out who I can point you to, or let me, think about that and get back to you. Or what I was trying to do was maybe write down a couple hypotheses about what it might be, after reading about what strategy actually is, and then present that, almost like test it and see if I'm off. And if I'm off, I could keep iterating. But yeah, that's
yeah. There's something interesting. Nikia, I see your question, and I will answer it, is that there's other ways to kind of use these coaching prompts as well, which is like, I think designers, we are right a lot of the times, through our work, research tells us a lot of stuff, but we can come in kind of hard and saying, this is what we should do, or this is what we've discovered. And if we think about it from a coaching prompt standpoint, it's this saying like, hey, I tried this. I'm seeing some interesting things. What do you think? What do you see? What am I missing? Is a great general kind of approach to go with somebody who's a counterpart, where you're really inviting them. And I think, Nikia, this is kind of related to your question where you say, if I voice my design strategy in business jargon, will it be accepted with not much pushback? And I think the answer is really, do you know that the person you're speaking to actually communicates and accepts business jargon? We might not. But if we observe conversations with them, maybe with others, we might see that, oh, they do. They understand. But it's also the case where I think, particularly, we're getting into things like, what are the patterns that our colleagues exhibit in terms of behavior and how people talk to them that we get into here. But I've seen lots of designers who've gone off and learned some business stuff, who then come back and they say, I've done the competitive analysis. Here it is. And that is often met with friction, because then somebody feels threatened that somebody else is doing their job. A better approach that I've just generally seen, again, my experience, is if a designer has some of that business jargon or has some of those business skills, is to sort of say, I was thinking about it in this way, or I began exploring it in this way. And I think I have some interesting things, but I imagine I'm missing things as well. What do you think? And again, it's that invitation to kind of get them, you want to essentially have them map with you, think with you, work with you, rather than this sort of just trading of deliverables. I don't know if that exactly answered your question. And let's just face it, there are lots of people who are in the business, who speak lots of jargon that don't really know anything beyond the jargon. Let's talk about math for a second. How many of you have ever been asked, what's the ROI of this? Does that question freak you out? Right, return on investment. One of the things that I teach a lot of students and work with a lot of one-on-one clients is, yes, that question is quite intimidating. And I think our natural reaction is to run to our computers and search and try to figure out the mathematical formula of what ROI is. But what I would ask you to do first, or maybe, see if you're curious to do first, is maybe ask, do you know that the colleague who asked that is using math? Return on investment is a very simple math formula. Return minus cost divided by costs. If you can calculate the potential costs of how much work you will do and how long it will take, but nobody is calculating the potential return, you can't actually calculate ROI. You can only calculate costs. And so the reason to ask about math is if somebody says, we need to increase the adoption, or we need to improve the velocity, is to sit there with that with a moment and say like, oh, that sounds interesting. Improving the adoption sounds like it's good, right? I'm curious what our current adoption rate is. And if your colleague doesn't have a rate, they're not using math, they're guessing. And so even though they're using the business jargon, they're actually not making like fundamental kind of business 101, data science 101 decisions. And if they are not doing that, I'm afraid to tell you there's no way you can ever meet the expectations of a guess, because they're guessing. And so you don't have a business problem to solve. You don't have a math problem to solve. You have a relationship problem to solve. And that problem is to see if you can get them to be curious enough to try math. That is a long, long road. But if they are using math, if they have an adoption rate, that's actually great. Because what that means is they have a specific audience that they are targeting, which means you can then hone in on the behavioral data or the persona work of that audience to figure out really the needs of that audience in a better way. And if they have a rate of adoption, say like 8%, and they're trying to move it for 10%, it's a great way for you to establish and set up a relationship. I think if we reduce errors by 5%, I think that will improve adoption by the 2%. That's a great test. Do you want to do that test with me? And that's how you can begin to sort of use this other way to start demonstrating we see relationships there. But again, it's a tricky question because there's a lot of people using business jargon, including business people who are not kind of making fundamental business decisions. Fun times, right? Everything you wanted in a career. Akila.
Hi, thank you so
Hi.
much for the talk. I had a question around the business strategy part and how design is a catalyst to, how the company wins at that. So
Okay.
I guess like combining that with what you said is sometimes we have to let go of, certain things we know. I guess it's a little unclear to me. Is it that we need to like let go of the fact that certain business decisions might already be in place and we might not have control over that? Or is it that we need to like push more because design is a catalyst to those things?
So the question is really, or the framing is really this. Do you believe there is a best practice, industry best practice to delivering great design? Just in general. You can unmute. We can chat. Do you believe there's like a standard, like we should do all these things?
No, I
Okay,
don't.
good.
Yeah.
There are a lot of designers out there who say like we have to do all the elements. What this framing is about is basically saying, let's take the comparison of Dell versus Apple. Dell's business strategy is different than Apple's business strategy. They are both in the computer peripherals business. Their model is somewhat similar. They create, deliver, and capture value. They create value, they give computers, through those computers, and they capture value because people pay them. The strategies are very different. Why? Apple chooses a business strategy, which is to be different or unique. To have design as this ultimate catalyst to really strengthen their position in being different or unique. And they are high priced. Dell's business strategy is to provide relatively affordable computers that are highly customizable. Dell does not make software. And they really win through superior supply chain. So in this case, good design at Apple is different than good design at Dell. Because if you try to introduce Johnny Ive or Steve Jobs' ways of thinking at Dell, they would go bankrupt. Because their business strategy is to be relatively low priced and sell at high volume, not make the world's best products. Is that helpful, that clarification?
Yeah, that's a really good example. So basically figuring out, like you mentioned those, for different things, like whether they want to be cheap or different or unique, and the other two things. It's not coming to mind right now, but figuring out where they want to win, since they've already figured that out, and see how design can add value in that space.
That's right. And if you think it's scaled, big companies, I'm sure all of us have worked at organizations where design is kind of under-resourced compared to engineering or product management or that. And so there's oftentimes that if we are more like running a design organization, we actually have to kind of make a choice of where we are going to play. That our skills and capabilities could really be useful in lots of places, but we might need to make the deliberate choice to say, here's the business critical areas where we need to play. And that means we might have to leave some of these other places, or just not apply our full attention there.
Yeah.
And so that's one of these things that we end up having to do too. But I'll also go back and say, have you ever worked at an organization where you've met with a business counterpart or a product counterpart and they say, well, we don't want to leave anybody out. We don't want to not have a customer, or we don't want to miss any customers. Well, in business 101 stuff, we would say that is a stuck in the middle strategy. And while a company might be earning money right now, long-term, that's a bad strategy because it doesn't really help you create that differentiated competitive advantage. Eventually, competitors will catch up. Eventually, the market will change. And I think that's a situation that a lot of designers, a lot of UXers, a lot of researchers, a lot of product people are in, is in an environment where you might be working in an org that doesn't really have a great business strategy. and that's really hard to then be able to be a catalyst or do something better when there's kind of no clarity around you. And that's a tough position for designers, because what we have to do is kind of get our business colleagues curious about getting more specific about that that decision. It's hard. Nikia, you asked, did you say to validate your boss that he was more receptive to your ideas? I mean, literally, I just said, hey, I apologize for my reaction. And I've thought about it. I've given some time to think about what you said. And it got me to think. It just got me to think in a new way. Here are my thoughts. That's the gist of what I said. And the important part here, I'm going to relate this to a psychology model. This comes out of parenting. I don't know how many people are parents, but there's a large group of research around a concept called good parenting. And I find it to be relevant because good parenting basically says, like, at best, really great parenting is when you're only being a good enough parent 30% of the time. That actually 70% of the time, you're not going to be a good enough parent. But the important part in that relationship or in that scenario is that for that 70%, you repair. You take the active step of trying to repair something. And so that's really what that sort of step was. I didn't know it at the time, but it was me acknowledging that I wasn't good enough in that one particular setting. And if I were to wait for my boss to repair it, that would have never happened. So I had to honor myself and say, I don't want to spiral. I'm going to repair. And so that's what that was. I don't want to go too deep into psychotherapy stuff. Anything else? We're good? Should we end on time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was perfect timing. Yep. Absolutely.
Cool. All right, my friends.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for everybody for attending. And we have a meeting next month. Please come back.
All right.
Have a great
See
night,
ya.
everybody.
See you on Slack. Bye.